Normally I tend to cover video games, but today we're going to talk about an upcoming movie. And how could I not? It's freaking Star Wars we're talking about. I've just been looking forward to watching it, and I was keeping my fingers crossed that this would be the movie to really end the saga on a high note. But from the looks of things, I cannot help but feel heartbroken, and while I haven't watched the movie to judge for myself, I cannot help but feel a sense of dread as the hours pass and as the official launch of this movie approaches. I've got my ticket pre-ordered, and I'm gonna go watch it, but my expectations have been dramatically reduced after the results that we're seeing here. So this is Rotten Tomatoes. The tomato meter for this movie is currently at a 53%. Now, just to give you some context, this is what the tomato meter looks like for all other movies in this series. So, Rise of Skywalker currently stands at about the same level as Phantom Menace. Both currently have 53%. Of the 9 movies, Phantom Menace and Rise of Skywalker are the only ones to get a rotten rating. They're currently the lowest rated movies as far as critical reception goes. Even Attack of the Clones has a fresh rating. So that by itself is already pretty disconcerting. But then you start looking at the headlines, you start reading the reviews, and you realize that a lot of the criticisms line up. Everyone's saying exactly the same things about the flaws of this movie. So in this video, I'd like to go through some of the headlines we're seeing from these reviews and give you my take. A lot of these headlines are not confidence-inspiring. So let's begin with this review by Polygon. The headline reads, "Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker is a defeat, even in moments of triumph. J.J. Abrams dives straight down the nostalgia well in Episode 9. So one common criticism that I've seen across all reviews is that this movie is far too focused on callbacks, on the greatest hits of Star Wars, rather than establishing its own identity, using what came before as a foundation. Next up, news outlet GameSpot. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker review, a galactic disappointment. The review score given to this movie was a very low 4 out of 10. The only positives that the review highlighted was that this is a beautiful looking movie and that the visual effects are impressive. But as far as the negative things go, whiplash-inducing story feels like 2 movies crammed into one. I've actually seen that particular criticism being said a lot. A lot of people feel as though there's so much crammed in this movie that it feels like 2 or 3 movies that are being rushed in the compact form of one film. And then here are more negatives. New and old characters alike are squandered with no development or meaningful arcs. Clumsy dialogue that fails to buoy absurd plot points from scene to scene. Absurd plot points is also another common criticism. A lot of twists and turns that make you go WTF, but for the wrong reasons. Takes great pains to retcon nearly everything that happened in The Last Jedi. This is also something that's been commonly expressed. Should be emotional moments have no weight, or worse, are actively absurd. And finally, cloying themes and messy over-explaining fail to fill in logical gaps. Another common criticism, there's just so much exposition in this movie, especially in the first half, that it all feels very unnatural and very forced. Next up, a headline from Vox. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker is what happens when a franchise gives up. The new movie is a colossal failure of imagination. So playing it safe is also a term that I've seen used a lot throughout reviews. Lack of imagination, treading old ground, relying too much on what came before. Next up, Vanity Fair review, The Rise of Skywalker and the Fall of Fun. J.J. Abrams' Star Wars trilogy ender is too desperate to be loved to take any real risks. The Irish Times, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker review, it's unworthy of the word cinema. Damn, this isn't a proper film, just a nondescript, boring component in the Star Wars machine 2 out of 5 stars. Dayton Daily News. Review: Rise of Skywalker is a sour end to a grand saga. Collider. Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker review: what a piece of junk. Cinema Blend. J.J. Abrams decided to play revisionist with Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and in doing so created a mess. This is an article from website Independent. Feels at times like a Star Wars greatest hits video and utterly lacks soul. So there's that similar criticism again. Lacks soul, lacks imagination. We hear that pretty commonly throughout these reviews. USA Today review: Rise of Skywalker concludes Star Wars saga with splendor and disappointment. IndieWire. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker review: the fan service is strong in a snazzy but uninspired climax. Fan service is also a term being thrown around a lot for this movie. It is so heavily reliant on fan service. In moderation, fan service can be a great thing, but in excess, it can really bring down a piece of work, and that's what seems to have happened here. Entertainment says Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is the Force Ghost version of a movie. And now we get into the headlines and reviews that are less harsh in their headlines, but express a similar level of disappointment. So this is Mashable. The headline reads, spoiler-free review, excitement first, story second. Another thing that's been highlighted in these reviews is that there's a ton of action in this movie, to a flaw maybe. It's just incessant and the movie just races to the finish line, and so the story gets lost along the way. IO9 very simply says Star Wars Rise of Skywalker is a disappointing way to end a saga. Vulture says Rise of Skywalker is a formulaic, crowd-pleasing cartoon. And now we delve into the reviews that have a generally more positive outlook, but still are conflicted about many aspects of the film. So Comic Book had this to say: Rise of Skywalker is a mixed bag of delights and frustrations that largely succeeds. IGN Rise of Skywalker review: this one last look at our friends can't quite bring the Skywalker saga to a fully satisfying conclusion. And this is what IGN said: despite giving the movie a pretty modest 7 out of 10, even with that score, they felt as though overall this wasn't the ultimate ending that the franchise deserves. And then here we have New York Post saying that Rise of Skywalker is an okay end to the saga, giving it a 3 out of 4 stars, so generally positive, but not blown away by it. And then Outlet People says that Rise of Skywalker is an epic conclusion that's strongest in the smaller moments. Although it lacks the more cohesive, streamlined storylines of its predecessors, Episode 9 is buoyed by always dazzling visuals, satisfying emotional beats, and solid performances. And now we delve into the really positive reviews. So this is The Telegraph stating, J.J. Abrams gives our heroes the swashbuckling, heart-rending ending they deserve, 4 out of 5 stars. Games Radar saying, a bumpy ride that ultimately rises to the impossible occasion. So still flaws that they point out, but they say ultimately the movie delivers. And then CNN says Rise of Skywalker rises to the occasion of concluding the epic saga. Then we have Mirror saying that Rise of Skywalker is an emotional ending to the blockbuster saga. And last but not least, here is Variety saying that no Star Wars film can fully recapture the thrill of 40 years ago, but as directed by J.J. Abrams, the 9th and final chapter in the saga that George Lucas created may come closer than any Star Wars movie since. So that's a pretty glowing statement. So there are definitely people who did like the movie, I don't want to downplay that, but most of the headlines and the general tone of reviews I've seen seem to give the impression that Rise of Skywalker is, all things considered, a disappointment and a very flawed movie in many respects. And perhaps the most heart-wrenching review of them all for me personally was watching Jeremy Jams just brutalize this movie. I mean, this is the first shot we see in his movie review of Rise of Skywalker. That is the face of a man who is tired and crushed and disillusioned. He's actually agreeing with the general sentiment out there. He's agreeing with a lot of the outlets that have given Rise of Skywalker a mixed to negative review. And in fact, I would say that Jeremy Jan's review is one of the more brutal ones out there. What really took me aback about this review and what really broke my heart to hear was when he said that for him personally, Star Wars Rise of Skywalker is the worst of the 9 movies. He dislikes Rise of Skywalker more than Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. That's how bad he thought this movie was. And I've seen his content for a while. He tends to give movies overall really fair reviews, and you really have to botch something pretty badly to get him to make that face right there. Now, I'm not saying that just because Jeremy Jans believes that Rise of Skywalker is the worst of the 9 movies, it's going to be the same for everyone else. But at the same time, when you consider some of the headlines we're seeing surrounding this movie, how much of these headlines lean so heavily towards negative, and when it is actually possible for a prominent movie critic to come out and use the words Rise of Skywalker is the worst movie of the 9 Star Wars films, I mean, that raises red flags big time, doesn't it? I half expected that Rise of Skywalker wouldn't be a perfect movie, but I didn't expect it to be so flawed that its tomato meter would achieve the same score as frickin' Phantom Menace. And the year is young. That score could drop even further. It could drop below Episode 1. And that is an achievement within itself. Like, when you can make Jeremy Jam say you've made a worse Star Wars movie than Phantom Menace and or Attack of the Clones, I mean, geez, it doesn't get worse than that. Now, with all said and done, I have not seen the movie yet, so I am not going to judge the movie itself. But what I can say is that my anticipation has definitely turned into trepidation. Yeah, I haven't been able to sleep reading these reviews. I've even been texting my brother, who's also been up all night reading the reviews and expressing his disappointment. You know, Star Wars is one of those things that connect my brother and I. This is something we constantly talk about. It's a huge part of our childhoods, our connected childhoods. We both wanted to see Rise of Skywalker rise to the occasion, but the impression we are currently getting is that we should expect to be disappointed. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that somehow I'm wrong and that all of these critics are wrong, but that seems like a very distant probability from where I'm currently sitting. But I guess the one good news is that with all this, I'm able to temper my expectations so that I don't walk into the theater too hyped up. So that's all I have to say on this matter. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the current tomato meter of Rise of Skywalker, what your thoughts and opinions are on the reviews that you've seen and read and gone through over the past few hours, what your expectations are of the movie. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, and the occasional movie tidbit, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.